Hello and welcome to another episode of EKU Online's eCast series. EKU Online's mission is to change lives by providing access to affordable and high-quality degree programs in meaningful disciplines that positively impact our society. We thank you for joining us. Today, our guest is Associate Professor Dr. Stephen Sumithran from the Department of Biological Sciences. He earned his bachelor's and master's degrees in zoology in India, and then earned his second master's in wildlife management from West Virginia University. He then went on to earn his doctorate in wildlife sciences from Virginia Tech. He has been at EKU since 1999 and teaches courses in zoology, ecology, and a number of wildlife courses. Dr. Sumithran is also intimately involved in eCampus, serving as the online coordinator for the associate's and bachelor's degree programs in general studies, as well as for general education and supporting courses. Welcome, Dr. Sumithran.
Thank you, Dr. Dwinels.
Because it's such an interesting story, let me begin by asking you about your doctoral research project at Virginia Tech. Would you please tell us a little bit about the adventure you went on in order to complete this research?
Well, as you said, I was working on my doctoral research at Virginia Tech. And for my project itself, I went back to India and was working on a mountain goat known as the Nilgiri tahr. Now, the mountain range that I was working in is a mountain range that runs along the west coast of India, called the Western Ghats, as you can see there in that picture of the map. And kind of right in the middle of those Western Ghats, you see a highly elevated plateau there, and that is known as the Nilgiri Plateau. And here the elevation is about 2,000 meters, roughly about 6,500 to 7,000 feet. And in these, along this mountain range, there is a high degree of endemism, meaning species that are found in the mountain range are not found anywhere else in the world. And also the UNESCO has designated the Western Ghats as one of the 13 biodiversity hotspots in the world. Not only because of its high degree of endemism, because also these areas are being threatened by habitat loss and human disturbance and so on. So right there in the middle of the Western Ghats, in these high elevations, about 2,000 meters and above, is a mountain goat known as the Nilgiri tahr. So I decided to work on this species, the Nilgiri tahr, for my research. This was recommended by the government of India and was funded by several agencies within the US, including the US Fish and Wildlife Service and the Smithsonian Institution and the Minnesota Zoo and so on. And before I left these mountains, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. All we knew is that this species was of great concern in India because their numbers had been declining. At least they thought they were declining. And so my goal was to figure out what the population status was of this endangered mountain goat, and also to figure out if there has been a decline, which almost certainly I think there was, and if there was a decline, why the decline had taken place and what could we do to mitigate this decline. And so I go out there, plan a good study from here, get all the money, go out there, and then realize that this is really inhospitable terrain. You know, I mean, it's absolutely beautiful in the winter months when it's clear and visibility is good. And obviously this picture is taken in the winter months, but then the rest of the year, it's extremely windy and also extremely foggy. And this region gets about 6 meters of rain annually, and that translates roughly to about 19 feet of rain annually. So I spent my 3 years there on this project, living in a tent with 3 meters of rain and gale force winds. And these mountain goats also prefer the steep ridges, I mean, the escarpment as it's known there. And so I had to walk along those escarpments to try and find these mountain goats. And well, I mean, so basically my first job was to kind of count them, and seeing them itself was pretty difficult. So anyway, I got to count them and realized that the populations were no more than 450 individuals. And that represented the entire world population. And also these are extremely skittish animals. They just run away the moment you get anywhere near them. And I'm talking of near being about 500 meters or 500 yards away, they would just take off. And so then we had to figure out, obviously there had been a decline. And then the next item was to figure out why this decline had taken place. And one of the main reasons that we found that this decline had taken place was because of 3 major factors. One was there was a lot of human disturbance in that area. Now, this place was really far away from any human habitation. The closest habitation was about 20 miles away from where I was. But as you can go into the next slide, you'll see that these areas are filled with grasslands, right? These are basically grasslands with steep escarpments. And this also happens to be the favorite area where Indian movie makers, now India makes more movies than Hollywood, so the Indian movie makers come here to shoot their movies, especially the song and dance sequences. And of course, this takes several days to shoot a song and dance sequence. And they choose the same areas that Tar prefer. And that loud music that they play and the number of vans that, excuse me, the number of vans that come out there really cause a lot of stress to these animals. And as a result, not all the females were breeding in any given year. So the number of young produced were significantly less, and that caused a constant decline in the population. Not only that, though this picture may not show it, but during the colonial times, that is pre-1947, the British came out there and saw these empty grasslands and thought they could convert these into some kind of a forested area. And so they planted a whole lot of exotic species to meet the fuel wood needs of the local people. And of course, that choked the grasslands, and that reduced the amount of available habitat to these species, which was basically these grasslands, which were their feeding grounds. So that was the second major factor that affected the population. And then the third was extremely high rates of predation. There was, one of the things that we looked at was who was feeding on these tar. And we found that primarily it was the leopards. It was the leopards that were feeding on tar. And the tar basically would stay away from these forested areas because that is where the leopards used to hang out. And we would collect the fecal material of the different predators, and then we were able to determine what they fed on, because I developed this really cool technique to look at the hair that is present in the fecal samples and then be able to identify what species these predators fed on. And so we were able to figure out that these tar were being depredated by leopards. So it was a combination of factors that led to their decline, but it was seriously, it was one of the hardest conditions to live under. But then this was the first study ever done on the tar. So I was excited about it. And of course I was much younger and capable of climbing those mountains. And so it was exciting, but I had to live in wet, dry clothes were almost a luxury, and it was always windy and always had the threat of some animal following me. I've been followed by leopards. I do not know Leopards tend to be more sly than tigers. They usually just are curious, I think. Never been attacked by one, but they just followed me. One followed me for almost 2 hours, would just walk behind me. But it was an interesting study. It was 3 years out there in the mountains, and I enjoyed it. And hopefully now the populations are rebounding because all these recommendations that we made to the government have been taken in. And so the populations are doing a little better now.
Well, you certainly went to great lengths for your dissertation, much more than I did.
Mm.
Live in the
Yeah.
in the wilderness there, but that's a fascinating story, and the commitment. I applaud your commitment to that.
Oh, thank you.
You
Yeah.
may very well have saved a species of this great world. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I hope I did contributed my little mite to saving that species.
Well, you are, of course, a professor of biological sciences here at EKU. What drew you to this discipline, and what keeps you interested in it? And if you could, just tell us a little bit about your research efforts.
Well, my interest in biology started really young. It's very different from most other kids my age group while growing up. Both my parents were naturalists, and in fact, my dad was a professor of zoology in India. And so I, from a very early age, was basically following my parents around as they went on their collection trips and so on. And so that's how I got interested in biology as a whole. And we also grew up on a forested area. And so there were plenty of wildlife out there. And so that drew me to be a biologist per se. And also, growing up, I did not have the traditional books that most children read. Instead, I would spend time in my dad's office reading textbooks of zoology. Kind of an unusual childhood to have, but that is what drew me to this discipline. And I always wanted to work with wildlife, but in those days in India, we never had a wildlife program. So the closest that I could do was zoology. And so I did my bachelor's and master's in zoology in India. And then, of course, came and was able to pursue my wildlife interests here in the US. So as to what keeps me interested, well, I should say today it's all about the students. The students are the ones that keep me interested in this topic because they bring up these wonderful questions and they are almost like sponges. They are willing to pick up any piece of information you could give them, not only from within the US, but from outside the US. And so that's what keeps me going every day in this discipline. It's the students. The bottom line is the students. You know, I mean, I have had a variety of research experiences all around the world. I've had graduate students work in Belize, and I've had graduate students work in Kenya. And of course, I've had graduate students work here in the US. But today I try to work more with undergraduate students. But most of my research concentrates on international conservation and looking at wildlife habitat relationships and using geographical information systems to try to model habitat use of these different species. And so worked on a variety of endangered species, right from in Kenya on the elephant shrew, and then of course in India with tigers and elephants and looking at mitigating damage and so on. And then also within the US, I've worked with other endangered species like the Allegheny wood rat and also some game species, because of course, money today is available mainly for game species, those that can be hunted, like the ruffed grouse. I've had a collaborative project throughout the Appalachians looking at grouse populations, and also work with other game species like raccoons and uh, organisms like that. So that's the kind of research that I do today, but primarily focused with undergraduate students than graduate students.
Well, very good. Talking about students, why would a student want to major in biology or wildlife management today? And what kind of jobs would they be able to get?
Well, primarily, if you look at most of our students that come into the wildlife program, most of them already have an innate interest in wildlife, be it whether they hunt and fish, because most of our students come from rural areas and hunting and fishing is a very important part of their life. So some of them are coming to learn about hunting and, well, because of their interest in the outdoors. And others have a strong interest in conservation, not just hunting and fishing, because hunting and fishing is also part of conservation, but more to work with endangered species. So that is what, that's the kind of demographic that we attract here, students who are interested in the outdoors primarily. But then they get a little bit of a shock when they realize that they're not going to be learning how to hunt and fish, but instead how to manage populations, which of course involves a lot of science and a lot of mathematics and statistics. And so that kind of puts them off a little bit, but then we try to nurture them and try to get them to complete their degree. As far as the kinds of jobs that they get, most of them want to get into state wildlife agencies. Like, for instance, the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. That's one agency that most of our students get into. And with a bachelor's degree, most often they get in as an entry-level position, working with as a technician or as a private lands biologist or something like that. So they either get into state wildlife agencies like the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife, or Tennessee Department of Natural Resources, or West Virginia Department of Natural Resources, some of these state agencies. And some get into the federal agencies like also the US Fish and Wildlife Service. And some even have got into agencies such as ICE, Immigration and Citizenship, if I'm not mistaken, services. Because basically what happens is one of the biggest trades apart from drug trade, illegal drug trade, is trade in endangered species. And at all these border checkposts, these biologists are required to examine packages that are coming in from other countries to determine if endangered species are being imported into the US, either for their pelts, their skin or trophies, or whether it's for pet trade. And so quite a few of them get into those kinds of jobs. And also some of them get into zoos because a lot of them who are in conservation get into zoos as curators or technicians and animal keepers at zoos. And then, of course, we have a sizable population that goes on to get their masters. So there are plenty of job opportunities for wildlife biologists. And I don't think I've come across a whole lot of students who have been unemployed after getting their degree in wildlife management from Eastern.
There are some people that would argue that it's difficult, if not impossible, to teach the hard sciences online. And I just want to hear your opinion about what you would say to those who make that statement. Can you teach the hard sciences online?
Oh, that's a tough question. Well, yes and no. All right. The yes is that, yes, certain courses lend themselves to be offered online, but not the upper division courses. The upper division courses are really not conducive to be offered online. And the reason I say that is because of the biggest constraint that we have is with the labs. All the science courses have labs associated with them. And labs are designed to reinforce concepts that students learn in the classroom, in the lecture, or also to be able to conduct experiments and collect data and be able to interpret the data. And they use highly specialized equipment. Now, for the upper division courses, it's almost impossible for students to acquire these expensive pieces of equipment and be able to conduct them either in their homes or places like that. So I think the upper division courses do not lend themselves well for an online delivery method. Um, However, our faculty at Eastern have been extremely innovative. And I think every department, every science department today has their introductory courses are offered online through EKU Online, and even on campus, they're offered online. And I think I attribute that uh, to the innovation of our faculty. They've been able to think outside the box, and they've been able to design experiments, and they've been able to contact commercial private companies that are willing to put these lab packs together and be able to ship them off to the students. And the students are able to conduct these studies and then, of course, these experiments in their home. And then we're able to look at the results, and they're able to interpret them, because it just doesn't require high sophisticated equipment. So some courses, as I say, are conducive to online education, especially the lower division courses, but the upper division courses are just not as conducive as the lower division courses, especially if they have labs.
Okay, very good. Well, in doing research for this podcast, I took a look at a couple of your EKU online courses, and I noticed that you use a lot of different learning assets, readings, presentations, videos. How do you think this variety contributes to the overall student learning experience?
Yes, I really do think it contributes in an extremely positive manner, because based on the student evaluations I get back, I see that they seem to enjoy it. And also the emails that I get from students, they seem to like it. I think, we do not need to reinvent the wheel when we are trying to put together an online course, because there are plenty of resources out there online. Just that a student who may not know anything about the topic, if they just Googled that particular topic, they're going to get a whole lot of information. And we, as the faculty, know what is information that is valid and what information that is not very correct. And we're able to pick out the appropriate tools or the appropriate learning assets and give them to the students. And I think, rather than just the student listen to my lecture or my lecture by itself, I think it really helps the student quite a bit to be able to listen to experts in the field, be able to listen, in some cases, if it's a TED Talk, listen to Nobel laureates, Nobel Prize winners, or, there's the Khan Academy. So there are various resources out there, and I think it helps break the monotony also. And one thing that I also noticed is that students tend to be more active in an online environment. The reason I say this is because I have some students who take my online courses and some who take courses, my in-person courses. And I have noticed that the same student who is really active on the discussion boards in the online course is relatively quiet in the classroom. They do not express their thoughts about anything eloquently. And I think the reason for that, and I've talked to students about it, and the reason I think that happens is because the online environment provides a certain kind of anonymity to the student. And they also feel that because when they ask a question in the class, they feel that their peers may judge them. Whereas when you use discussion boards and all these other learning assets out in the online environment, students do not hesitate to express their opinions. And they're very good at expressing their opinions, and they have very strong opinions. But they're willing to do that because they do not really see their peers face to face in a discussion board, for example. So I think they bring a lot more into the classroom or into the online environment in an online course because they feel free for some strange reason. They feel free to express their opinions. And I think overall, this variety of resources that I use in my classes really enhances the learning experience for the student.
Well, you're known, Dr. Sumithran, as a follow-up question to this, as an exceptional instructor, both face-to-face and online. What is it that you like about the online mode of teaching? And can you give the listeners some tips on effective online teaching?
Well, online is a kind of a double-edged sword. It's either you really like it or you don't, you know. And so to me, online, the platform has been extremely wonderful. I really love the online environment. Uh, and as I mentioned earlier, it's mainly that students are more vocal in the online environment, vocal in the sense on the discussion boards where they type up their responses and so on. And so I really enjoy that interaction with students, but I also enjoy, I get a lot of energy meeting students in a classroom environment. But as far as tips that I got, I'm just going to give you my thoughts on it. I mean, these are just my thoughts. I've tried them, they worked, but it may not necessarily work for everyone else. But I think one of the most important things in the online environment is to maintain a strong presence in the online environment as a faculty, as the teacher. You need to maintain a very strong presence. Because if you think about a classroom situation, you have students meeting you 3 times a week, and they see you face to face, and you see them face to face. But in an online environment, it's very easy to go into quote unquote hiding, you know, where the student doesn't see you and you don't see the student. And so it's really important to have that strong online presence. And you can do it several ways. One is, of course, sending out regular emails to students or posting announcements or even having virtual office hours on Zoom and asking students to come into those Zoom meetings and so on. So I think that is one of the most important things, is to maintain that kind of a strong presence in the classroom. And second thing that I would think about is do not hesitate to use new technologies, right? What I mean there is use different technologies that are out there online. But the most important thing is that when you use new technologies, as the instructor, you need to be familiar with the technology yourself. You need to spend some time getting yourself familiar with the technology, because you do not want to experiment with the students. Of course, you can tell the students that I want to try this new method out, but you need to know all the workings, because if the technology is an impediment to learning, then of course it is not going to be profitable for the student. So you want to make sure that you're able to address any issues that you come across with the technology and be able to help students out with the appropriate solution. So it's really important to be able to try new technologies. And the other thing is, when we are in an online environment, we're dependent on the internet. And given the population of our students who could be in rural areas or in urban areas, I mean, they're all over the place. Some of them are in international settings also, especially those deployed into the military or something like that. And so I think one thing that we need to be careful or need to be aware is you need to expect the unexpected. In other words, what I mean is be ready for an internet connection to go down while a student is taking an exam. And that can certainly cause a lot of stress to the student. They flood you with emails. So expect the unexpected, and also got to be, as the instructor, you got to be relatively flexible. All right. Now, I don't mean just being totally flexible and saying whatever is good, no problem, everything's okay. You do your stuff whenever you want. No, I don't mean that. What I mean is if a student, because you've already built this relationship with the student, a professional relationship, they've seen you, you've seen them. And so I think we need to be able to, accommodate students when the internet fails, be flexible about deadlines if for some reason it fails, and so on. So I think that flexibility is quite important, and which we may not do in a classroom setting because we have a set time when we offer an exam, and a student will come in during that time, take the exam, and then it's done. So that is another tip that I could think of for teaching in an online environment. Again, going back to that first point that I made, which is maintain a strong presence. It's very easy to turn off your camera while you're talking to students or you're delivering a lecture. And I would say, show your face so that students are able to place a face on the name, and that builds a great relationship. Try to send students emails often, individualized emails, or have them as an assignment, email you personally an email about some topic that they want to write on or some kind of an assignment, but rather than post it to a discussion board or a forum out there, to email it to you personally so that you can then communicate with them and then be able to build that relationship, a professional relationship. And I think that goes a long way in the online environment that we do in a classroom situation, but in the online environment, we need to extend that into that forum also. And then finally, I think, we are all long-winded. We like to talk a lot. That's why we get into teaching, because we like to express all our thoughts about a topic. But I think if you look at students, especially the non-traditional students, they have multitasking. They have families, they have their job, they have their course, they want to advance their career, and so on. And so when we make our lectures, I think it would be useful to restrict our lectures to about 20 minutes a lecture, which is all that a student has an attention span for, about 20 minutes. And also it's easier for them to find these little 20-minute slots to listen to your lecture, and then reinforce it with all the other tools that are out there by, TED Talks, nothing goes more than 10 minutes. And so these kinds of short experiences really enhances the teaching in an online environment. So that's basically what I have practiced, and those are not my real tips, but these are things that I've tried and they have worked, and I seem to like what I'm doing, and the students seem to like it too.
Well, those are excellent tips. When you read books about best practices for online teaching, every one that you mentioned is a best practice. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Because you wear so many hats here at EKU, I'm going to shift gears again a little bit. And you are also the online coordinator for the associate's and bachelor's degrees in general studies. Can you tell us a little bit about those two degrees? I mean, if a parent were to come up to you and say, Dr. Sumithran, My son or daughter is thinking about majoring in general studies. Could you tell us a little bit about those degrees and what the student can expect upon graduation?
I think the way we've got our online general studies program structured at Eastern, it tends to be more of a completer program. Because for one, I mean, students during their traditional college years, when they are 18, 19, they join college, and then life takes over. And for one reason or the other, after about a year or two of college, they drop out and maybe the workforce or have a family to take care of, or whatever the reason may be. So what the online program is designed for at Eastern is basically to help these students put all their credits that they've gained over the years, maybe at a community college, at Eastern, wherever they've gained these degrees, and I mean, these course credit hours, and put together into a cohesive degree. And there are two ways of going about it. One was the associate's degree, and the other, the bachelor's degree in general studies. Now, the associate's degree requires only 60 hours of coursework. And of course, 36 hours of that comes from their general education courses. And the other remaining, I want to say 14 hours comes from their electives. They choose whatever course they're interested in. So after 60 hours, we can award them an associate's degree in general studies. But what we've found is that most of our students do not really want the associate's degree, but instead want to go on for a bachelor's degree. And so in order to go on for a bachelor's degree, what a student really needs is 120 hours of credit hours to be able to get their bachelor's in general studies. Now, again, here, 36 hours will come from their general education hours, and then 39 hours from their upper division electives, which is 300 level or higher, and another 39 hours from the free electives courses that they've taken over their academic career. And so we're able to accept students from various parts of the country and also from different parts of Kentucky and be able to award them a degree. And I think this is really, if you look at our demographics of our online bachelor's and associate's degree students, most of them are non-traditional students. Most of them are non-traditional who maybe in their late 30s have joined the workforce and then now realize that they have all these courses that they have sitting over the years that they've taken these courses, and realize that they need a degree, a formal degree to move on, to be able to get a promotion and to move on in their careers. And so then they come to us and we're able to direct them and guide them into what courses to take based on their interests and so on. And so that basically allows them to get their bachelor's degree in general studies. Now, unlike, and this is where I think these general studies degree is very different from a traditional major on campus. Let's say you take a wildlife major or a psychology major. They have taken detailed courses or in-depth courses in their respective disciplines. So I think what that does is it gives them only one tool in their toolbox to confront real world situations. Whereas our students take a variety of courses, whatever interests them that they can use. And so what they're doing is basically they're bringing different perspectives into the workforce. It's just, I always like this analogy that someone gave me once, and it says that if imagine you were asked to nail a nail into a piece of wood and you had a hammer, that would work great. But if you were given a screw and had to get that screw into that piece of wood and all you had was a hammer, it's not going to work. You need several tools in your toolbox to be able to approach a problem. And I think general education or general studies and general education provides students with all those tools. And if you look at our students today, they are not in any particular job. They are in various kinds of jobs, right from managerial positions at retail stores, all the way into education and into, say, golf management. They do a whole variety of things. And I think a workforce that has more tools in their toolbox are more sought after by potential employers than someone who just is specialized in one discipline.
Well, as we wrap this up, Dr. Sumithran, I'd like to ask you another question. In doing research, I understand that annually you go on safari. And that sounds absolutely fascinating to me. Can you take a few moments to tell us more about these trips, why you take them, and what you do on safari?
Well, I love looking at wildlife. I mean, that is my passion. Wildlife is my passion, not just always studying them, but also to enjoy their beauty. I mean, they are extremely beautiful, especially when you look at these big cats or elephants and things like that. So it really, and also just being out in the woods, and so that is something that I've started doing over the last 10 years is to take time off during summer and take time off from my research, take time off from my teaching, and just go and spend time in the wilderness, just looking at animals and enjoying their beauty and photographing them. And to me, it really is a rejuvenation of my soul. Okay. It sounds very, very different, but it's a rejuvenation of my soul. It just gives me the energy to come back. And when you watch these majestic creatures, not so much from a research point of view, but just watch them and watch the other people who are excited by watching them. You watch little kids looking at these animals because the little kids are the ones that have got to take care of these resources in the future. And so when you watch how excited they get watching a tiger, as excited as you get, you know that the world is in good hands. That these kids, when they grow up, are going to have that same love for the environment that they have seen as a kid. And it takes me back to my childhood days when I would go with my parents and get to spend time out in the woods. And the excitement that they inculcated in me at that time, has brought me to where I am. And I'm hopeful that the world is in better hands as we get more and more kids to go out into the wild and spend time and enjoy it rather than sitting and playing video games in their homes. So it's just gratifying to the soul.
Well, this has been such an enjoyable conversation, Dr. Sumithran. Is there anything else you'd like to leave with our listeners? Any tips or any words of wisdom?
Well, don't look to me for wisdom, but but no, I think this has been such a privilege to work here at EKU. I mean, I always wanted to maybe spend time later in life in Africa or somewhere like that, working with underprivileged children and underprivileged students. But I realized that I don't need to go all the way to Africa to do that. And I think right here we have that opportunity because our students come from such varied backgrounds. And I think there has been nothing more satisfying in my life than taking a farm boy or girl and converting them into a scientist. And I think that's one of the strongest points about Eastern, which has kept me here and keeps me going. And I think every one of us, I'm sure, feels the same way. Every one of the faculty here feel the same way, that we have a purpose here. And I should say that I've enjoyed it thoroughly.
Well, Dr. Sumithran, we thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And we wish you nothing but continued success here at EKU. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Dwinels. Thank you very much.